Hey everyone, and welcome to our deep dive today. You know, when you shared these sources about the consequences of overstaying a visa here in Canada, it really got me thinking. There's so much talk out there,
Yeah.
rumors and misinformation, maybe even wishful thinking. So we're going to clear the air today and get into the realities using what you sent us.
Yeah, it's such a crucial conversation to be having right now, because your sources are really revealing, kind of like a ticking time bomb. There are a lot of people here in Canada who are reaching the end of their allowed stay, and their options for staying legally are shrinking.
Exactly, and that's where things get, well, dicey to say the least, right?
Yeah.
The legal side of all this is complicated, and the stakes, well, they're high.
Absolutely. The impact goes way beyond paperwork. We're talking about people's lives, their dreams, their entire futures. But before we dive into all that, let's lay down the law, so to speak. Understanding the rules of the game is step one.
Okay, so let's unpack this legal maze. Where do we even begin?
Well, let's start with the very basics. The difference between just getting into Canada and being allowed to actually do things once you're here. You see a temporary resident visa or a TRV. That's like your basic entry ticket. And for some folks, that includes an electronic travel authorization or an ETA. Think of it like a pre-approved visa that you get online. Now, these just get you through the door. They don't automatically give you permission to work or study or anything like that.
So even if I have that visa, if I want to work or study, I need a separate permit specifically for that.
Precisely. It's like having a driver's license, but needing a special endorsement to drive a truck. And this is where the rules get really important. Regulation 183. I know it sounds like legal mumbo jumbo, but it basically lays out exactly when your permission to be in Canada runs out.
So it's not just about the date on my visa. There's more to it.
Way more. That authorized stay, as they call it, it ends if your permit expires, sure, but also if your passport expires, your biometrics expire, or even if you leave Canada and you're not allowed back in. It's a lot to keep track of, and the consequences of messing up are serious.
Speaking of consequences, there's this thing called the 90-day restoration window.
Yeah.
I keep hearing about it. What does it actually mean? Is it like a get-out-of-jail-free card?
Not even close. It's often misunderstood. Look, if you realize you've overstayed, you technically have 90 days to apply to get back into good standing. But, and here's the catch, specific conditions apply. It's not automatic. And it's definitely not a guarantee. It's more like a Hail Mary pass.
So what happens if someone just ignores all of this? They let that 90-day window slam shut
Yeah.
and just stay.
Well, that's when you cross a very bright red line. Section 41 of our Immigration and Refugee Protection Act kicks in. It basically says that overstaying makes you inadmissible. In plain English, you broke the rules and now there's a price to pay.
And that price, it can't be good.
Let's just say it throws a major wrench into your plans. For starters, getting future visas or permits becomes a near impossible uphill battle. And there's this other rule, Regulation 203, that really slams the door shut. If you've worked or studied without permission, you are banned from getting a new permit for 6 months. Straight up.
Whoa, 6 months. So even if you find an employer willing to go through all the hoops, like a labor market impact assessment or an LMIA, to prove they need to hire you, you're still stuck.
You got it. That 6-month ban doesn't care about job offers. It's a hard stop. And it shows you how one seemingly small decision, overstaying, can trigger a chain reaction of consequences. It's like setting off a domino effect. That can mess things up for years to come.
So we're not just talking about a slap on the wrist here. We're talking about potentially jeopardizing your entire future in Canada. It's like a shadow hanging over you, making everything harder, even if you try to do things the right way later on.
Exactly. And it's not just the legal headaches. There's a very real human cost to all of this, which is what we're going to get into next.
Definitely. We're going to explore how these legal realities play out in real life, the struggles, the heartbreak, and the impact on everyday lives. Stay with us, because things are about to get very real. It's easy to get lost in all the legal jargon, but, at the end of the day, this isn't just about rules and regulations. It's about people. Real people with real hopes and dreams who find themselves in incredibly tough situations.
Yeah, and your sources really brought those human stories to life in a way that really hits home.
Yeah, there was one story in particular that really got to me. It was about this Filipino worker who came to Canada on a visitor visa, hoping for a better life, She ended up
Yeah.
getting a job. But because she wasn't authorized to work, she was completely at the mercy of her employer.
Right.
They took advantage of her, paid her next to nothing, and she had no way to fight back.
It's heartbreaking, but sadly, it's not a unique story. When you're working under the radar like that, you essentially have no legal protection, no recourse. if you're mistreated.
And it's not even just about unfair wages or bad working conditions.
Yeah.
It's the constant fear, the anxiety of knowing that at any moment everything could come crashing down. You can't live a normal life. You can't build a future. You can't even go to the doctor without worrying about being reported.
Right. It's a heavy burden to carry.
And that weight, I mean, it takes a toll, right?
Absolutely.
On your mental health.
Yeah.
The stress, the isolation, the feeling of being trapped.
It can be overwhelming.
For sure.
And, imagine the impact on families, especially when there are children involved.
Well, yeah.
Living in the shadows like that can be incredibly damaging.
And then there was that other story about the immigration consultant. You know, the one who was preying on people's desperation, making promises they couldn't keep,
Oh, yeah.
charging exorbitant fees for nothing.
That case just highlights the dark underbelly of this whole situation. There are these unscrupulous individuals out there who are exploiting vulnerable people, taking advantage of their lack of knowledge and their desire for a better life.
It's like adding insult to injury. Not only are you facing this impossible situation, but you also have to worry about being scammed, being taken advantage of by the very people who are supposed to be helping you.
Yeah, it's awful.
And unfortunately, those stories are just the tip of the iceberg. We're talking about potentially thousands of people living in Canada illegally, trapped in a cycle of poverty, fear, and exploitation.
It's a hidden crisis that doesn't get nearly enough attention.
And it's not even just about the immediate hardship. It's the long-term consequences that can be even more devastating.
Right, you're right. Imagine trying to build a career when you're constantly looking over your shoulder. Imagine not being able to provide for your family, not being able to give your kids the opportunities they deserve.
And what about travel? You mentioned earlier that Canada shares information with other countries. So if you've overstayed here, could that come back to haunt you if you try to travel or even immigrate to another country?
Oh, absolutely. Many countries have agreements in place to share immigration data. So that overstay in Canada, it could very well mean being denied entry to another country, even if you have a valid visa. It's like this digital footprint that follows you wherever you go.
So we're not just talking about a Canadian problem here. We're talking about something that can have global implications.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that in today's interconnected world, your actions in one place can have consequences far beyond your immediate surroundings.
Precisely. And that brings us to a topic that comes up a lot in these situations. The idea of an amnesty.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. Your sources mentioned it, and I know there's always this buzz, this hope that maybe, just maybe, the government will offer some kind of blanket pardon to those who overstayed.
Yeah, it's understandable why people cling to that hope. It's a glimmer of light in a very dark situation. But realistically, an amnesty is highly unlikely.
Why is that? Why wouldn't the government consider giving people a second chance?
Well, for starters, the political climate isn't exactly conducive to that kind of leniency right now. Immigration is such a hot-button issue, and public opinion tends to lean towards stricter enforcement, not blanket forgiveness. Plus, there's the precedent it would set. If you offer an amnesty once, people might start expecting it to happen again and again, and that could create a whole new set of problems.
So even though there might be some sympathetic voices out there, you're saying that the overall political will to offer an amnesty just isn't there.
Exactly. And there's another factor at play here. The government's focus on managing immigration levels, recent policy changes, things like tightening the rules for getting an LMIA, and putting caps on the number of study permits issued, all point to a desire to reduce the number of temporary residents in Canada, not increase it.
So betting on an amnesty, that's a pretty risky strategy, especially if you're basing your entire future on it.
It's a gamble, and the odds aren't in your favor. And think about it. If you're caught overstaying and you were hoping for an amnesty that never comes, you're in a much worse position than if you had addressed the situation proactively.
So hope is not a plan.
Precisely. It's time to face the music, understand the realities, and explore the options that are actually available. And sometimes, the best option, as counterintuitive as it may seem, is to go home.
Okay, I think we can all agree that banking on an amnesty that never happens is a recipe for disaster. But if staying in Canada legally isn't an option, what's the alternative? It feels like we're hitting a dead end here.
Well, sometimes the most strategic move is the one that feels the hardest. Going home. I know that's probably not what anyone wants to hear, but voluntary departure actually has some surprising benefits.
Wait, hold on. How is leaving a good thing when you're trying to build a life here?
It's all about playing the long game. Think about it. By leaving voluntarily, you're showing Canadian immigration that you respect their laws, even when it's tough. It demonstrates good faith, a willingness to play by the rules. And that goes a long way. If you ever decide to apply for a Canadian visa again in the future.
So it's like you're proving you can be trusted, that you're not trying to game the system. It's like building up good credit, but for immigration.
Exactly. And while you're back home, you can actually use that time to your advantage. Gaining foreign work experience is a huge plus for Canada's express entry system, which is how a lot of people immigrate permanently.
So it's not just about going back empty-handed. It's about strategically using that time to strengthen your application for the future, turning a setback into a setup.
Precisely. And who knows, you might even discover amazing opportunities that you never knew existed back home. You can leverage your Canadian education and experience to find a great job, start a business, or even pursue further education. It's about broadening your horizons and building a global career, not limiting yourself to just one country.
Yeah, it's like that saying, when one door closes, a window opens. You just have to be willing to look for it. But what about those scary stories we hear about deportations? Being banned from Canada forever. I mean, it's easy to let fear take over.
I understand that fear, but let's be realistic. Being forced to leave, being removed, as they call it, that comes with a whole other set of consequences. You could face a ban on returning for years, needing special permission just to set foot in Canada again. It's a much harder path.
So voluntary departure is about taking control, making the best of a tough situation, and keeping those future options open. It's not a defeat, it's a strategic retreat.
Exactly. And remember, knowledge is power. What we've done in this deep dive is equip you with the facts, the real deal, so you can make the most informed decision possible.
We've laid out the legal landscape, shown you the human side of this issue, and debunked some harmful myths. And at the end of the day, it's your life, your future. No one can make that decision for you. But we hope this deep dive is giving you the clarity and confidence to make the choice that's right for you, even if it's a difficult one.
Absolutely. And to leave you with one final thought, if staying in Canada legally becomes impossible, what steps can you take right now to set yourself up for success, no matter where life takes you? What skills can you develop? What connections can you make? What opportunities can you explore?
That's a powerful question.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's the perfect note to end on. Because even when facing tough choices, we always have the power to shape our own destinies. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. And remember, stay informed, stay resilient, and never stop striving for a brighter future.